Now, to get to the root of Mandalorian culture and where they first came from, we once again have to visit Legends. Because the canon version is pretty vague and borrows a lot of details from Legends anyway, as will probably the Mandalorian TV series. Now, canon Mandalorians do diverge from Legends later on in their history, but in the beginning they're pretty much very similar. The Mandalorians started as an ethno-linguistic people, which means they were united by their culture and their language known as Mandoa, and not by their race. And contrary to popular belief, the Mandalorians didn't start out as humans. The culture traces its roots back to the planet of Coruscant to the ancient species known as the Twang. Thousands of years before the Republic was even formed, the Twang found themselves fighting against the 13 human nations on Coruscant known as the Battalions of Zel. A huge supervolcano erupted and the humans were nearly wiped out, but they managed to regroup and drive the Twang off of Coruscant. Interestingly enough, the orbit and size of Coruscant is pretty similar to Earth, and the 13 nations kind of sound like a post-apocalyptic Earth society. Also, the supervolcano sounds kind of like Yellowstone, and then, well, the Twang kind of look like predators. So, well, we'll let you guys draw your own conclusions about that. Anyway, the Twang eventually found temporary refuge on the planet of Rune. Their constant struggle for survival had turned the Twang into a warrior society that placed a heavy emphasis on honor, loyalty, and military service. The culture, language, and traditions of the Twang people would form the foundation for the Mandalorian people. The Twang were eventually united under the leadership of a warlord known as Mandalore I. Mandalore in Mandoa means sole ruler, and eventually the Twangs called themselves the Mandalorians, or the people of Mandalore. First, the Mandalorians would conquer another planet in the Outer Rim 7,000 years before the Battle of Yavin. This would become known as the planet of Mandalore, which they named after their leader. Mandalore was a beautiful wild planet inhabited by large beasts known as mythosaurs. The Mandalorians hunted these giant beasts to extinction and gained complete dominance of the planet. And when I mean giant, I mean the size of small cities. Now, most colonists would have skipped the planet full of kaijus, but the Mandalorians saw it as a fun group bonding experience. That basically sums up what kind of people they were. Now, Mandalore had a very rare material that can only be found on the planet's surface and its moon. This was known as Mandalorian iron, or Beskar in their language. Mandalorian armorers found a way to make one of the strongest metal alloys in the galaxy with this material, and they would die before giving up the secrets of how they forged it. Which is why only Mandalorians were equipped with Mandalorian armor suits. These suits of armor were impervious to multiple blaster strikes and even lightsabers. The Mandalorians of this period were named after their armor, which they called Crusader armor. The Mandalorian Crusaders, armed with these advanced suits of armor along with advanced weapons, started a war of expansion on its neighboring planets. Along the way, they fought the Mandalorian giants, who not only repelled the Crusaders but won their respect, and some even joined the Mandalorians. And that was very much the spirit of the Mandalorian people. They didn't really care what color your skin was or how many limbs you had, as long as you knew how to cleanly decapitate a person with one swipe of a vibro axe and knew how to properly rape and pillage a village, you could join them. The Mandalorians continued on their journey of conquest, and another Mandalorian leader rose up known as Mandalore the Indomitable. 4,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, the Mandalorians had arrived to the planet of Basilisk. Despite Republic support, the Mandalorians quickly overran the lizard-like natives. They ended up enslaving them and using them as aerial war mounts. Yup, they took a race of sentient beings and turned them into beasts of labor. They also took the Basiliscan war droids, which were robotic mounts that were semi-intelligent and would become an important part of Mandalorian culture, a weapon that all of their enemies would learn to fear. Eventually, the Mandalorians ended up in the deep core area, because they were supposedly looking for more of a challenge. It was there that Mandalore the Indomitable was defeated in a duel against the Sith Lord Keldrama, and swore fealty to the Sith and his master Exar Kun, and joined the Great Sith War against the Republic and the Jedi. United with the Sith, the Mandalorians became even more bold and assaulted a Republic shipyard and stole over 300 Republic ships, and then carried out an assault on Coruscant. They even successfully held on to the Galactic City for a period of time. The Crusaders were then sent to take over the Palace of Onderon, where they fought against the legendary Beast Riders on their Basilisk war droids. It must have been a pretty crazy fight. Imagine a cavalry battle in the sky. But the Onderonians had managed to call the Republic for backup, and the Mandalorians became trapped once the Republic fleet appeared in the system and destroyed the Mandalorian fleet. Mandalore the Indomitable managed to lead his crusaders to the moon of Onderon, whose atmosphere was still touching the planet at the moment. But his war basilisk was shot down and he was killed by wild animals. One of Mandalore's crusaders found his mask, took it, and then claimed himself to be Mandalore, starting a new tradition. After this battle, the crusade ended, and the next 20 years was relatively peaceful. The Mandalorians kind of chilled out under the rule of Mandalore the Ultimate. Now, the Mandalorian ranks had become so depleted that some of the more ancient species like the Twang had been completely wiped out. So under Mandalore the Ultimate, the Mandalorians recruited even more individuals of all different races, including a lot of humans. To create more cohesion amongst their new recruits, they adopted a uniform armor and would become known as the Neo Crusaders. The Neo Crusaders started another campaign of conquest even more brutal than the last one. They conquered the planet of Qatar, where they massacred 90% of the population. The Great Sith War had just ended and the Republic were hesitant to fight the Mandalorians again, but eventually they got dragged into the war known as the Mandalorian War. The Mandalorians went on to conquer many planets including Onderon, Duros, Taurus, and were on the verge of defeating Republic forces when a faction of the Jedi Order led by the young knight Revan finally entered the war. Unbeknownst to the Jedi, Mandalore the Ultimate was being influenced by the Sith and being used as a proxy to weaken the Republic and the Jedi Order. The Jedi under Revan soon turned the tide against the Mandalorians, and finally on the planet of Malachor 5, Revan defeated Mandalore the Ultimate in a duel and claimed the Mask of Mandalore for himself. At the same time, Revan ordered the use of the experimental mass shadow generator to destroy the entire Mandalorian fleet, along with a good portion of the Republic fleet. The Mandalorians surrendered after this and were stripped of their armor, their basilisk droid, and Revan, to add insult to injury, took the Mandalorian mask and hid it so that no Mandalorian could claim the title of Mandalore, thus ending the Neo Crusader period. With no true Mandalore to unite them, the Mandalorian people fragmented and scattered across the galaxy in small nomadic groups. This is where we dip into canon. Disney canon states that the Jedi eventually led the battle against the Mandalorians back to their home planet of Mandalore, where a cataclysmic event completely destroys the surface. But from what we can tell, this is where canon begins diverging from Legends. Because in Legends, the planet of Mandalore doesn't turn into a wasteland and continues thriving well past the Clone Wars. Disney canon also states that one member of the House of Vizsla eventually becomes a Jedi and then becomes the Mandalore of the Mandalorian people. The Jedi Mandalorian eventually forges the Darksaber, which becomes a symbol of unity for the Mandalorians. It seems like after the surface of Mandalore was destroyed, the Mandalorian people gave up their dream of conquering the galaxy. Many Mandalorians gave up their armor and warrior culture and retreated to the Dome Cities on their desert planet, while others left the planet to find mercenary work. In a last struggle, the remaining Mandalorian warriors of the Old Way fought against Duchess Satine and her new Mandalorian faction. The new Mandalorians eventually win. The Duchess believed that the warlike nature of the Mandalorian people had led them to their destruction, and the only way forward was through peace and economic development and political stability. The new Mandalorians drove out the warrior factions, and for a while Mandalore prospered under the leadership of Duchess Satine. During the Clone Wars, the Mandalorians remained neutral and at the head of a coalition of neutral planets. Unfortunately, that peace wouldn't last. One Mandalorian faction, known as Death Watch, would return under the leadership of the former Sith Maul and take over the planet, executing the Duchess. But soon after, Maul was confronted and captured by his former master Darth Sidious, also known to the galaxy as Chancellor Palpatine. Maul's super commandos would eventually rescue him, and then he would return to rule Mandalore until the waning days of the Clone Wars. During the Siege of Mandalore, the planet fell under Republican control, and former Death Watch Lieutenant Bo-Katan Kryze, the sister of Duchess Satine, took over the throne. Bo-Katan was then eventually ousted by the Empire when she refused to swear fealty to Emperor Palpatine. During the Imperial occupation of Mandalore, the Saxon clan would join forces with the Empire and help rule as the administrators of the planet. Bo-Katan ran the Night Owl faction, which was directly opposed to the Empire, while Gus Saxon of Clan Saxon became the Imperial Viceroy and led the Imperial Super Commandos. 20 years later, during the height of the rebellion, another Mandalorian civil war erupted as Clan Wren, led by Mandalorian rebel Satine Wren, fought against Clan Saxon for control over the planet. Satine eventually defeats Gar Saxon in combat and reclaims the Darksaber forged by the first Mandalorian Jedi. The Darksaber had replaced the helm of Mandalore as a symbol for Mandalorian unity and leadership. Satine would lead the pro-rebel Mandalorian faction to victory and eventually hands off the Darksaber to Bo-Katan Kryze, who assumes leadership of Mandalore.